So, um, when I have the opportunity to lecture on this unit pertaining to the progressive era, which falls under, I think, Unit 5, called the New Politics. You've got a lot of information in this unit to read. Um, but, usually when I have class time, I like to dedicate a little bit of my lecture to providing a bit of understanding between the difference between the terms progressivism and conservatism, right? Because these are very important terms today, particularly in the political struggle of things, right? We have a tendency to, I don't know, dehumanize is not the word, maybe, or objectify those who are on the opposite spectrum politically than we are, and we don't gain any sort of insight as to why people think the way they think um, when we do that. And so, one of the things that I tend to advocate in this unit about the progressive era, before getting into the progressive era, is really kind of discussing a little bit about the value sets and the perspectives of those people who come from the way of thinking known as progressive versus conservative. And I like to use the term progressive instead of liberal. You hear that term liberal versus conservative in our society, which is very problematic because that term liberal and liberalism means something entirely different for different groups of people, right? Classical liberals would be a term that means something entirely different than the term liberal today. So I want you to think of it more specifically as progressive versus conservative. And I would say these are value systems, the things that people have through their lived experience in life come to value as part of their social existence, social development, or atmosphere, however you want to call it, right? So let's start with what we mean by conservatism. To conserve is the root of that word. To not use very much. To maybe withhold. Conservatives value tradition because they look to the past for answers on how to move forward, and they say if something has worked for long in the past, we should keep with what that is. Approach change with very bit of skepticism. Um, Change is inherently bad, um, unless it needs, unless it has been given enough time to be evaluated and slowly begin to change things, right? This phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or the phrase, keeping my roots firmly in the ground. These are very conservative mindsets, right? I like to use the analogy of walking across a um, sheet of ice, maybe in the cold, right? A conservative would say, we need to walk very carefully across this ice. Yeah, maybe we do need to get to the opposite side, right? We haven't, but but we need to go very slowly so that if we find any cracks or see any areas where the ice may be vulnerable, we can step back and pursue another path. Um, Progressive philosophy is a bit different. If we start with that same analogy, um, think of it as if we got to get across this frozen lake. Where we're at right here is not going to work. It's not going to cut it. We don't have time. We are going to freeze here. So what we're going to do is we're going to plow through. We're going to run as fast as we can to get to that other side. And if we break through, we'll climb out and we'll keep working through to get to our destination. And we may make mistakes and fall through, but we're going to have to get moving. And if we do, we'll have to climb out and move even faster. The reason that mindset is different is because it revolves around this concept that change is inherently good, or change is something that we should begin with. That change is beneficial, and there may be obstacles that are thrown at us as we change, but we're moving forward, progressing, developing, increasing, improving, um, and they focus on the problems at the present level that need to be fixed, change to help fix those problems. Whereas the conservatives don't focus as much on the problems that need to be fixed. They highlight the successes that we have been towards in the traditions. And if things get to a point to where we can't, they'll look at the problems, but their main focus is the traditions, right? And so I want you to think of these two terms differently. And the reason we call the progressives at this time, um, is because they believed in a new form of government, that changing the government at this time, uh, changing the philosophy of the government, changing the system of government, changing the approach to government, or changing the relationship between the government and those who are governed, was necessary. There was a lot of corruption, right? This is important because it could be very confusing, because you see conservatives today arguing, that big government's bad because there's a lot of corruption, right? Well, back at this time period in the early 1900s, those calling themselves progressives were the ones arguing against the corruption, right? Society was corrupt. There were these big bosses like Boss Tweed, Tammany Hall. There were these massive robber barons who had a lot of political sway and could convince lawmakers of establishing legislation in pursuant of their own interest. Um, and so people calling themselves progressive back then were making arguments about the government that people who call themselves conservatives today are making about the government. This is one of the reasons why I want you to see these terms uh, in these ways. And by the way, this is also very important in helping you understand people who have opposite beliefs than you, because one of the things we want to get you to do in higher education is develop an appreciation for argument. We have this tendency to think of arguments as being something bad, or something conflicting that's negative, right? And in fact, I think we should change our belief in what an argument is, as it being something positive, as it being sort of like a struggle to get to an agreement, instead of a chance to express how much better my difference is than yours, right? Um, think of an argument as a negotiation process. You want to try to convince your person of your views, but you also want to try to take their views into consideration. And when you understand the philosophies, then you have a better chance of sort of coming out with your ideas uh, being accepted better in an argument, right? For example, like if you're a Christian, you want to debate a Muslim, um, it doesn't really help if you're just going to tell the Muslim all these Christian things. But if you understand Islam and you debate that Muslim to see and put that person in a position to see whether or not they are living by their religious beliefs, or whether or not they think they are, and maybe when you help them realize that they're not, they then open up their mind to other views, or vice versa, right? Same thing with the Christian or the Muslim arguing with the Christian, right? If Christianity says these beliefs, and you show somebody that they don't actually adhere to those beliefs that they claim to be uh, supportive of, then you back them up, and they have to either abandon those beliefs and accept other beliefs, or they have to make the changes, right? The point is that um, it's always a good idea to understand the opposite side's philosophy, in terms of the opposite side of your own belief system, because you could gain some value in understanding uh, something in conservative values if you are progressive. And you could also, in turn, gain something if you are conservative and you really try to understand progressive value systems, right? Because in the end, people really are the way they are because their lived experiences have made them think this, right? And oftentimes, what we know about history is that our lived experiences is a very small slice of the larger context of history and culture, right? So we got to make sure that we're not taking our own small observations of this vast reality and applying that to thinking we understand uh, everything, right? Open up your mind for other political views or ideas or cultural values, and you can develop stronger relationships and be more successful. And that's ultimately what we want you to do out of college with these critical thinking skills. So, after this, now, hopefully, you can approach this reading in this unit um, and understand what we mean by the progressive era. Now, and we'll move into more important, uh, histories. Now, we're going to get into um, some of the progressive era policies, right? And how responding to the Industrial Revolution, people began to question the role of businesses in particular industries and the need for a third party to sort of come in and ensure that these businesses aren't bottling water that's contaminated because they don't want to spend the money to, check it, or taking trash and just dumping it wherever, right? These things that we take for granted that are part of our society today, like a trash pickup system or a city water system, did not exist in the late 19th century and early 20th century. You saw that in the Industrial Revolution, the squalor and all these other things in societies. And so, what we're going to start to see is people coming together and thinking about how to fix some of these public health concerns that were associated with the rise of an Industrial Revolution.